Mr. Speaker, Singapore has one of the lowest car ownership rates among advanced economies worldwide. In 2022, there were only 149 cars per 1,000 inhabitants here, a rate less than half that of the UAE or Taiwan, a quarter that of the United Kingdom, and Switzerland, and 6 times less than New Zealand or the United States. The upshot of this is that our streets are among the least congested in the world. Compared to global cities such as London, Chicago, or Paris, where drivers spend more than 130 hours sitting within their car, sitting in traffic last year, local commuters only lost 26 hours to jams, and correspondingly less in terms of economic costs from lost time and patrol. This is admirable for a global city, and one that we should not take for granted. This is evident for anyone that has had to endure rush hour in the major metropolitan of our neighbors, whether it be Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur, Jakarta, or Manila. And a major reason for this favorable anomaly is, undoubtedly, the system of electronic road pricing, or ERP, and the vehicle quota system, or VQS, of which certificates of entitlement, COEs, are the much reviled offshoot. COE prices hit a new high in October, following repeated new records set in prior months. The open category now changes hands at $158,000, more than 5 times the recommended retail price of a brand new Honda Civic or Toyota Corolla, so elsewhere in the world. This is one of the major drivers of ever-rising pressure on our nation's cost of living, and COEs were implicated in the most recent increase in headline inflation. Now, some may argue that cars in Singapore are a luxury, and a car-like society is both better for the environment and more than made up by an excellent public transportation system. Surely, the price of COEs are only the concern of an elite few. But for middle-income families with younger children, as so many of my Sengkang residents are, a car is almost a necessity for getting kids to and from childcare and school, co-curricular activities, enrichment classes, and weekend shopping trips. Similarly, those who are elderly or less mobile may well feel that a car in the family is less of a luxury and more of a need. And car ownership is more widespread than we may think. 2 in 5 households own one. And even for those who do not own a vehicle, the price of cars and COEs bleeds into our costs every time we hop into a taxi or book a private hire car. The high prices of COE for cars has even spilled over into that of motorcycles, at least until recently, where the relatively low cost of ownership used to be a refuge for those with more modest means wishing to have their own private mode of transportation. Now, the VQS and COE were introduced in 1990. The objective, along with ERP, was to restrain ownership so that road traffic remained smooth. Inherent in the policy is a decision to exchange certainty in congestion management for uncertainty in prices faced by aspiring car owners, along with the possibility of inequity in access and usage. Put another way, the government consciously chose a quota system knowing that it could lead to rising costs. If so, it follows then that policymakers should step in and manage prices when they get too far out of whack. Since its introduction, the system has been repeatedly tweaked. These included minor adjustments, such as tenders becoming monthly instead of quarterly, but others have been more consequential, such as a decision to go from closed to open bidding to make COEs non-transferable, or the collapsing of private car categories into the present 2. But the government chose to lock in vehicle quotas with some initial allowance for growth at the levels associated with the new car registrations established in the years following the rollout of the VQS. This has led to significant variations in the total quota in different years. The difference in the highest and lowest supply years has been, on average, as high as 4,300 every month. In 2018, the rate of growth of cars was frozen. This means that the stock of available COEs is now indefinitely fixed, and hence the allocation of COEs is effectively zero-sum. If you are an aspiring car owner, but are priced out of the market, then, well, too bad for you. If a well-off family can afford to buy multiple cars for each of their children, it will come at the expense of others who are less able to do so. This could be a delivery person who may need a vehicle for work, a household with a sick or disabled member that needs a car for routine hospital appointments, or a family of 5 who would benefit from one ride to shuttle their kids to and from school. But the government has emphasized that, while it aims to keep COEs affordable, they were decidedly not a tool for enhancing progressivity. This capsule history lesson is instructive because it helps us understand not only the motivations behind why a COE system was rolled out, but also why this history has unwittingly introduced shackles that inhibit the successful and equitable functioning of the system today. Perhaps the best way to think about COEs and the VQS is that it's a two-step system for controlling the vehicle population. The VQS first sets the number of cars that ply our roads. After this is established, bidding via COE efficiently allocates the available quotas to potential car owners. COE bidding requires each bidder to make offers, but only pay the price of the lowest successful bidder. It was inspired by auction theory, and in particular the Nobel Prize-winning insights into how best to ensure that each bidder bids as much as their own private valuations would carry them. At the same time, no bidder has any incentive to deviate from the bids that they put forward. The outcome will, in theory, not only raise the same revenue as an auction awarded to the top bidder, but also allocate these COEs efficiently. This is all well and good, but herein lies the wrinkle between theory and practice. While the COE system was modeled after this so-called second price sealed bid auction, real-world considerations have meant a departure from this theoretical ideal. Bidding is now open rather than sealed. There are multiple certificates to be issued, not just one. And perhaps most importantly, to make things easier for car purchasers, we now allow dealers to bid on buyers' behalf for multiple COEs. So the government has made some efforts to address the recent spike in COE prices. They've tweaked supply, mainly by bringing forward confirmed 5-year COE deregistrations, and have increased bid deposits for motorcycles while shortening the temporary validity period. But these have had limited effect, which is unsurprising since the moves are one-off. Measures that appear to contain prices in motorcycle COE markets are unlikely to work for car COEs since dealer strategies for selling cars and motorbikes differ. Perhaps most importantly, the freed COEs still constitute only a drop in the bucket of the overall quota shortfall relative to high quota years. Even with the cut-and-paste measures announced in November as shared by SMS Cheong Tat yesterday, my calculation suggests that these adjustments inject only about 10% more COE into supply on average within each category per month, whereas a more decisive cut and paste is required to genuinely move the needle. To be clear, the government is well aware of how relative quota differences are unequal across the years and has been aware of this for a long time. In response to Workers' Party MP Mr. Loh Tia Kiang's query in 1998 about whether COE prices were due to such quota imbalances, then Minister of Communications Ma Bao Tan simply explained that they were fixed at the beginning of each quota year, conveniently sidestepping the issue of whether a more balanced distribution of quotas were called for. Members of the public also recognized this. A letter to the Straits Times on October 14th called for managing COE demand and supply, not alternative newfangled systems. Another online commenter to CNA claimed that we are being, and I quote, penalized unnecessarily by a good system gone rogue, end quote. Transportation experts also expressed their displeasure that the COA system has now not gone through a more fundamental review to deal with changes since being introduced 33 years ago. But unlike Vegas, what happens in the car COE market doesn't stay in the COE market. Rising COE premia affect the prices of used cars, of course, but they also affect the cost of motorcycles, which are frequently used not only for transport, but also to make a living. High COE also adds fuel, if pardon the pun, to other expenses already on fire, ranging from private hire fees to motor repair. Yeah, in response to the parliamentary questions filed by the honourable member, Mr. Yip Hon Weng, in 2022, the Ministry of Transport stated that they would not be exercising any controls on the PHC market. The response to another PQ filed by my honourable friend, Louis Chua, likewise shunned the idea of restricting PHCs from the COE bidding process. Indeed, the ministry has gone as far as to say that LTA has no plans to review the COE rules. Now, what can we do? One approach is to further segment the COE market in some way. This decision is not as radical as it seems. Since the scheme was first introduced, there have been changes to the number of categories before being continually refined to the present 5, as I mentioned earlier. Today, there are routine calls to cater to separate, specialized categories of COEs. One way would be to drop the open category altogether or further tweak the criteria for the other categories. One could also create categories specifically for vehicles driven primarily for commercial purposes, or, as I suggested in my speech on the electric vehicles charging bill late last year, for EVs. However, one potential implication of introducing additional categories is that, depending on the distribution of demand among the potential buyers, there could well be greater upward pressure on COE prices. Overall, the evidence suggests that categorization is often gamed, and as a result, would likely do little more to improve equity considerations. So for me, it doesn't offer a substantive way forward in terms of arresting price increases, even if it could be used potentially to fulfill other objectives. Now, the increased pervasiveness of private hire cars, and the number has grown fivefold over the past decade, has also been blamed for rising COE prices. One aggressive solution is to ban PHCs from the COE market entirely, managing their quotas separately. The Ministry of Transport has suggested that there's no evidence to support this argument, and has even gone as far as to suggest that doing so could even drive up costs for consumers. Even so, it makes sense to remove PHCs from regular Cat A and B bidding. Instead of banning such vehicles from the bidding process altogether, bidders for high-usage PHCs should be allowed to do so in the open category, but be allowed to pay the respective Cat A or B prices. This is actually the current practice for taxi cabs, and given how PHCs essentially replicate many functions of the taxi insofar as road usage is concerned, standardizing the COE treatment for vehicles effectively used for commercial vehicles still makes eminent sense. Of course, the practical question is how PHCs may be properly classified if this were to be the case. Now, I do not think that with rideshare data easily obtainable, that a data-savvy government such as this cannot successfully make a determination between, say, low-use PHCs, that is, cars that are only used occasionally, being operated as PHCs, when they do not exceed a certain threshold of rides a month, for instance, versus high-use PHCs, which are primarily operated as rideshare fleet cars. PHC drivers will be required to comply with their usage group, much like how weekend cars were restricted, and they will be monitored by asking ride-hailing app companies to furnish these data. Only high-use PHCs will then be required to bid in the open category. Another strategy is to alter the bid structure. One such suggestion, which has been previously rejected by the government, is to pay for exactly what one bids instead of the lowest successful bid. Alternatively, bids could be set in terms of percentages of the open market value of the vehicle. This system, the so-called ad valorem system, which has been championed by some academics. Relatedly, categorizations could be altered and pegged not to the, say, cubic capacity or engine horsepower, but market value. Proposals of this nature are reasonable and have the added advantage of making the system more progressive. But in my view, such proposals will only make a small dent on COE prices. What would make the most impact is to smooth the vehicle quota supply by transferring excess quotas from the high supply years to the low supply ones, such that quotas are broadly equal across future years. Importantly, this involves more than just the marginal transfers from expected deregistrations that are largely the focal point today. As mentioned earlier, the feast and famine nature of the COE market has long been recognized as a problem. What has made this approach even more problematic is that in low supply years, deregistrations, since car buyers, what has made this approach even more problematic is that in low supply years, high COE prices discourage deregistrations, since car buyers need to purchase new COEs at the high prevailing prices, whereas in high supply years, those who have secured COEs at the high prices have incentives to sell their COEs, pocket the prorated reimbursement value while eating some depreciation, and re-enter the COE market. Both practices exacerbate the supply imbalances. Hence, the existing practice of reimbursing early deregistered COEs at their book value should end. We may even wish to reconsider transferability, since there's very little evidence that this practice actually increases speculation. But importantly, transferability should be allowed not to other car owners, but to other cars in the same category for a given COE holder. This preserves the flexibility for car owners to sell early, should their circumstances change, without introducing perverse incentives to game the system. Now, thus far, I focus mainly on supply-side proposals. What about demand? Hopefully, it should be clear that the enormous variation in COE prices has more to do with known and alterable supply factors, rather than demand, which the data suggests are secondary. But perhaps more importantly, demand effects should be expected to moderate even further in the future, since increases in per capita incomes, which alter structural demand growth, should already be expected to moderate, given how we have already attained the status as a high-income country. Still, two demand-side proposals merit further consideration. First, dealers should no longer be allowed to bid. There is substantial evidence that speculators bid up COE prices because dealers have a greater willingness to pass on costs or occasionally absorb loss. They could contribute to upward price pressure, as some have suggested. Others, to be fair, have argued that dealers have an incentive to keep the COE bid low, since they sell cars and COEs in a bundle and can pocket the difference if COE prices are low. Regardless, the evidence suggests that dealer intermediation has likely resulted in greater concentration in the distributor industry, and such market power is seldom good for competitive prices. After all, price discovery has already improved substantially with open bidding, thereby diminishing some of the benefits of dealer handholding. In my view, the presence of distributors, despite the benefits of convenience of having a one-stop shop for purchasing a car, interferes enough with auction prices as to render their exclusion the lesser evil. Better for such distributors to offer advisory and guidance, perhaps for a fee, than be in a market-making position of collecting and making multiple bids. Second, require second car purchases to be in the open category. The inequity of second or third car purchases has bothered many, and one proposal has been to apply some form of additional buyer duty on such purchases, as the member Hazel Poir has mentioned, under the premise that these purchases, however small, could still fuel demand and push up COE prices, as my honourable friend Gerald Giam has suggested. While the ministry has declined to pursue such restrictions, one alternative, which admittedly would require some policing, would be to require households to seeking a second or third car to do so in a distinct category, thereby limiting their price pressure on Cat A and B. So I've focused on solutions in the COE market for cars. Even so, I will reiterate what my honourable friend Faisal Manap had previously shared about our position on motorcycle COEs. The issues in this category are somewhat distinct, not least because many riders are lower income and require access not just for private transportation but to make a living. Progressivity should therefore be an even greater concern in this market, and to this end, one is left to wonder why motorcycle growth is constrained in much the same manner as cars, given their much smaller vehicular footprint. I will close, Mr. Speaker. I believe that the recent cyclical highs in COE prices has come at an inopportune time and has contributed to already rising cost of living. The existing VQS COE system is broken, and while the government has made tweaks to the system, these do not address the the true underlying problem that has led to boom-bust cycles in COE prices. Let's not ignore the most important driver of supply, the imbalanced monthly quota, and some of the most prominent sources of demand from PHCs and wealthier multiple car buyers. Let's better manage the COE system, an important driver of the rising cost of living, which is consistent with the goals of the original motion, which I support.